David, thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here, thanks.
I want to talk today about innovation. I want to talk about the trends in technology that are driving innovation. And I want to talk about how a company with the size and scale of Samsung can compete with the agility and speed of a startup in trying to stay innovative. But first, David, let's hear a little bit about you, as you have a very interesting vantage point when it comes to innovating. You are the president of Samsung Next. You are the chief innovation officer at Samsung. And I think many of us know Samsung because we have Samsung devices in our homes and in our pockets. But your job is a little different. So tell us a little bit about what you do and how you approach innovation in your role.
Sure. So one of the, and I've talked about this before, but one of the paradoxes of corporate life is that even for the most successful companies, you always have to think about moving forward, thinking about what's next, what are the growth areas, and if you don't innovate and move forward, if you're standing still, you will fail. Mm-hmm. And of course, the dilemma is that, especially with the bigger companies, the successful companies, oftentimes what has made you successful, what is at the core of what you do, can become so big it can become a blind spot to what's around the corner, where the growth opportunities are. And this is where Samsung Next comes in. We are an innovation group within Samsung, and we are purposely built to focus on innovations in software and services that could complement Samsung's historic expertise in hardware and consumer electronics. And we do this by having an exclusive focus on startups and entrepreneurs, which is why we're here. And in all under one roof, we have a venture capital team, we have a business development and partnerships team, we have an M&A team, and we have a product development team, all aligned around one goal, and that is really understanding and working with the best entrepreneurs out there to identify new services that could benefit Samsung and vice versa. And that's what we do at Samsung Next, and that's why we're here, as I said.
Cool. I want to talk about some of the things that you're interested in when you are looking ahead in the future and thinking about trends that will benefit Samsung. And I want to start with one that I think everyone in the room is very familiar with, which is artificial intelligence. Obviously, this is something that's woven through many of the products that Samsung is producing. And Samsung has invested quite heavily in AI. I know you've earmarked $22 billion over the next few years toward edge technologies like AI. Yep. Tell us about why that's so important to you at Samsung and what you're investing in specifically.
Yeah, so I think we've stated publicly we're going to invest $22 billion over the next 3 years in 5G and AI. And many people kind of know this, but they don't, but we sell over 500 million displays a year. And our goal is to have every single one of those displays with some form of intelligence in them. Now, it's still early days in AI and development, and much of what we've seen in AI is very much focused, as many of you in the audience may know, on machine learning. But there are many different approaches to AI, and while machine learning is fantastic and has created a lot of great outputs and benefits so far, these different approaches we think are very promising. And so a few years ago we launched, in fact last year we launched a fund just focused on early stage AI startups called the Q Fund, with the idea of opening up and interacting with different approaches to AI, different startups who are trying to address different issues and problems along the whole value chain, all the way from sort of deep data analysis and gathering to tools for developers to applications.
What's an example of something that was funded with the Q Fund?
There's many examples, but one example that we have is a company called Missing Link. It's based in Israel and San Francisco, and what they are doing is providing tools for developers to create more efficiency in the way they harness and work with AI data. And so a lot of people don't know this if you don't work in it, but when you take something like machine learning, it really is scaling and getting your arms around huge volumes of data. And that can be a very cumbersome, sometimes inefficient process. So we are providing tools and approaches that make it much more efficient and easier.
Let's talk about some consumer trends. Since a lot of what you do is sort of gazing out into the future and sort of predicting what people will be doing with technology 3, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. What is exciting you right now when you think about the future for consumers?
Yeah, so in my role as a Chief Innovation Officer, what I and my team try to do is identify long-term consumer and tech trends that are going to affect people and businesses globally. And a lot of times people focus on what I would call like features or kind of neat functionality in technology, which is great. But what we've been doing more recently is going a little bit deeper on the fundamentals of how people are seeing the world and behaving. And one of the things that we're observing, I call experiences over things. And essentially what is happening, especially with younger consumers around the world, and not just in the US or North America, Canada, et cetera, around the world, is that younger consumers are valuing experiences over things. And by experiences, I mean authentic social experiences rather than purchasing, transactional items. It doesn't mean that they won't buy things, but the things are a means to a greater end. And in fact, if you look at the data, there's 4 times more spending in things. When you do the research, something like close to 80% of all millennials are predicting that they will spend more money on things, on doing things rather than buying things. And you look no further than whether they're live events or going out to eat or gathering together with friends, what you would call these Instagrammable moments. They're Instagrammable not because they're just interesting. They're interesting because they're inherently social and more compelling. And what our research indicates is that when you have these kind of memories and these experiences, when you look back, they're more apt to have positive associations. It's more closely linked to people's sense of happiness, of satisfaction. And so why is that important? Well, whether you're selling a car or selling luxury goods or selling TVs or services of any sort, the idea of pushing the thing versus pushing what can be enabled by the thing, the experiences, is really important. And as we internalize that, it makes us think about how the physical and the digital worlds are coming together, combined with the focus on experiences. And not surprisingly, you're seeing these huge trends, these activities and services that are really popping. So for example, the idea of owning things is receding, and having access to things to have the experience is more prominent. So you don't have to buy the music, you don't have to buy the video content. You can have a subscription to a Spotify or a Netflix, right? You don't have to buy a car necessarily if you can get access to it through an Uber or a Lyft. Even clothing, right? So we have a startup investment in Germany called Grover, and what they essentially do is they turn every transaction into something that could be subscriptionizable. So you could effectively have access to something without necessarily buying it. And obviously for consumer electronics, it's very big, but there are scenarios where essentially if you want to stay mobile and stay light, you don't have to buy the apartment you live in, and the bed, the table, the utensils, everything that you have could be more of an access to it through subscription. So when we think about this, and it's happening globally, it makes us think about, well, if you are in the startup space and you know that consumers are headed and developing that way, not only are there questions about product development, but marketing and branding and the way you communicate who you are and what you do.
Yeah. I want to return really briefly to your idea of experiences over things, because I think this is so interesting and you can see it happening industry-wide. Yeah. Samsung is obviously a company that has a big business in selling hardware. You sell TVs and phones and appliances. So if the trend is that people are investing less in these physical things and more in what you can do on them, you have a big incentive to find and nurture these services that people are excited about. What are some examples of the things that you're excited about when you think about people investing in those experiences?
Yeah. So, well, the good news is that for one to have great experiences, things are important. And with this combination of the physical and the digital, we look at the house and we think there are amazing transformations that are already beginning to happen that will continue. So one example is the kitchen, right? If you look at the kitchen itself and you look around at your appliances, for the most part, there haven't been huge tectonic shifts in innovation. But when you look at the behaviors and the way people spend their time and create experiences, a kitchen used to be where you cooked, a dining room is where you would eat, and a living room is where you would hang out. And today, for many people, it's all kind of come together in the kitchen. I mean, how many of you all have breakfast nooks or kitchen islands in your homes, right? How many of you, when you have friends over, spend a large or disproportionate amount of time in the kitchen? And so as we think about the kitchen, we think about having experiences and enabling those experiences. We just acquired a company based in London called Whisk. And they're essentially a food/kitchen platform where they allow consumers to find online recipes, so to be inspired, to discover, to go all the way to executing restaurant quality meals. So they have relationships with publishers and people who own recipes, to people who have websites and apps that consumers use, to retail, so you can easily buy the ingredients of things, to preparation. And you're seeing now tremendous innovations even in appliances. So you can easily cook really delicious quality meals and have great experiences around them. So we think, what might have been even overlooked before, like the kitchen, is a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs in hardware, software, and services to really speak to consumers and build very promising businesses.
Absolutely. So this example you just gave, Whisk, this is an acquisition.
That's right.
So you do acquisitions, you also do early stage investments.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about how these companies feed back into the Samsung ecosystem. Obviously, you're looking at things that will enhance the experience of using Samsung products, but sort of what does that mean when you acquire or invest in one of these smaller startups that's doing something interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big insights or lessons learned, I think, of us and perhaps other companies is that big companies do things a certain way that have helped them become successful. And there are approaches and processes and cultures that form. And oftentimes they're very different from startups, right? So I spent the earlier years of my career in media, and now I work for a large, let's say, hardware consumer electronics company. And in those industries, when you offer a product up, you want it to be as perfect as possible. Because once you broadcast the show or put the refrigerator in retail stores, you can't change it. It's got to be as perfect as it can be. Of course, on software, you have almost the opposite mentality, right? You launch early and you iterate. And oftentimes, you use your users, you leverage their expertise and their feedback to identify bugs and fixes to improve your product. So given that the cultures and approaches are so different, what we try to do when we make an acquisition is think beforehand, even as we're doing due diligence, of what we call the PMI looks like, the post-merger integration plan. What happens after the acquisition? If you consider the acquisition day one, well, what happens on day two? And for those of you who are entrepreneurs and are in startups, that's a really important question. And so what we want to do is try to preserve those things that made the startup so attractive in the first place. The way they work, their culture, the people, and we don't want to kind of mess with the magic in a way, but we also want them to learn new things and have access to have integration to the scale and the resources of the large company, which is one of the reasons why they wanted to get together. So striking that balance is not always easy to do, but it's essential. And for those of you who are in startups, when you think about the huge goal of having an exit, and maybe that includes an acquisition, one of the things I would strongly recommend is you really look at acquisition. I mean, sure, it's a great success event, a reason for celebration, but in a way, a form of business development, a way of getting to the next stage of fulfilling even bigger goals for why you created the startup or joined the startup in the first place. And I think if you partner and get acquired by the right type of company, they can provide you with tremendous leverage, and that's what we try to do. I find sometimes, and this happens you'll find this even in partnership discussions, you hear a lot from them what they want from you, but not necessarily what they can give to you, right? So it seems common sense, but you'd be surprised at how often people forget that, and you understand why, because you've been so focused on getting your message out or making sure people understand the beauty of what you're trying to do that you miss that. And this goes for recruiting people. It goes to having conversations at a tailgate or a barbecue, and someone asks you what you do, really trying to put yourself in that frame of mind. So that's what I would say. I heard this quote, and maybe this is a way we could end the quote. I heard this quote recently, and I really like it, and I don't know if you all have heard it, but it's about what being an entrepreneur is. Being a successful entrepreneur means doing today what others will not do, so tomorrow you can do what others cannot do. And I really like that, so I wish you all the best.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
Arielle.
David. Thank you.